Thank you very much. It's great to have Prime Minister May from the United Kingdom and her representatives, who are people we know very well through recent trade negotiations. I have to say we'll be doing a lot of trading with the United Kingdom, and we look forward to it. And we have gotten to know each other over the last period of a year, and it's a real honor to have you here. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. It's good to be here. And as you say, we've had many discussions between our representatives and ourselves on a whole variety of issues, including trade, which will be important for us, but some other issues, foreign policy issues, our security and defence relationship, which of course is the closest, the UK and US is the closest we have. And it's great that that continues.
Well, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
What will you tell the Prime Minister?
What do you say? Thank you, everyone. Mr. President, what do you say to allies who don't want you to be Iran? Prime Minister May, thank you.
Thank you.
And there you have it, a brief moment we get to witness between President Trump and UK Prime Minister Theresa May, happening on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. Hey everybody, I'm Amna Nawaz, live in New York. Obviously, President Trump spoke yesterday, delivering his remarks to the General Assembly. We're going to talk a little bit about how they are landing across the world and down in Washington, D.C., which is where we go live now to my colleagues Rick Klein and Mary Alice Parks. How you doing today, guys?
Hey, I'm good to be with you.
So we obviously saw there the photo op, which we get to witness every now and again. Two leaders sit together, shake hands, say everything is great, we're all moving forward. We're more interested in what happens behind closed doors, obviously. How are President Trump's words from yesterday landing today across the rest of the world and down in Washington?
Well, keep in mind, first of all, it's only been a week since President Trump's tweet, less than a week since the tweet about the terrorist attacks had Theresa May so upset and warning that it's not really a constructive part of the conversation. But look, that speech yesterday is still echoing through the ears of world leaders. If you look at it at two different levels, to my mind, it was in some ways a very conventional Republican speech, but then it had all these Trumpisms. And to go out and call him Rocket Man in front of that body, you have some U.S. allies who say, well, it's time to call him out, but a whole bunch of other folks who are saying that is not the forum, it's not the time or the place to use that kind of rhetoric.
And I think you have world leaders today, maybe not surprised they're feeling this way, but nonetheless just feeling a little bit more lonely today. That was a speech full of a lot of big threats, but with very little talk of helping your neighbor.
Feeling very lonely today. Mary Alice Parks is worried about how they're feeling. One person we don't have to guess about, though, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. I want to play you a little bit of sound because in reaction to President Trump's speech yesterday, today, Rouhani kind of went after him in very blatant and clear terms. Take a listen to what he had to say about President Trump's stated intention to pull out of the Iranian nuclear deal. Here it is.
I declare before you that the Islamic Republic of Iran will not be the first country to violate the agreement. But it will respond decisively and resolutely to its violation by any party. It will be a great pity if this agreement were to be destroyed by rogue newcomers to the world of politics. The world will have lost a great opportunity. But such unfortunate behavior will never impede Iran's course of progress and advancement.
Rick Klein, rogue newcomers. Rogue newcomers. Have we had any response from the White House to this yet?
Well, I'm anticipating what the possible nicknames. You could have done a lot worse. I mean, Trump called someone Rocket Man yesterday. I mean, whether it's an Elton John song or something else, you could do worse with Donald Trump. Look, the White House reaction to the Iranian reaction is basically, who cares? The whole point of this speech yesterday, and not just for the North Koreans and the Iranians, but also the Venezuelans, the Cubans, is to call them out and say, look, this is not acceptable behavior. So I don't think it bothers the Trump White House to be called a rogue newcomer. I don't think President Trump really minds that. I think much more important is the reaction of U.S. allies. And the president also said today that he's made a decision on that Iran nuclear deal, but he isn't telling us what it is. He's got a deadline coming up in a couple weeks to recertify on that. You're seeing, though, a lot of pressure from other world leaders, including notably the new Prime Minister of France, saying this is not a time to renegotiate. We should be looking forward. This agreement is not being violated. It seems to be working if the idea is to keep another nuclear armed nation from joining the world stage. So I think he's going to come under a lot of pressure actually to keep this. And so the talking in the last couple of days may not change that.
At the same time, it's really interesting to see what is catching on, because the president obviously continues with these one-on-one meetings. He continues with other speaking engagements. There was this luncheon today. He was speaking to a group of leaders from different African nations. He was talking about a lot of the economic advancement that they've been making in their respective countries. And then there was this moment that seems to be catching on. Take a listen.
We hope to extend our economic partnerships with countries who are committed to self-reliance and to fostering opportunities for job creation in both Africa and the United States. Africa has tremendous business potential. I have so many friends going to your countries trying to get rich. I congratulate you. They're spending a lot of money.
Rick Klein, this is catching on for a number of different reasons, but give me your take.
Well, first, you can tell he stopped reading and started
when
winging
he goes off script.
Yeah, that wasn't in the prepared script. I guess there's a level to this. You say, well, at least he's being honest, that people are going in there as entrepreneurs to try to make a lot of money. And to President Trump's mind, going in there to get rich is not a pejorative statement. But I think it's viewed in a much different area if you have ties to Africa, or you're worried about the progress in Africa and you think you're on whose back here, or are you actually getting rich? So I think that's one way it's being perceived on the Trump meter today.
Right, and plenty of conversations, honestly, about what the U.S. role should be in Africa. There's been conversations about where Chinese development has gone in, where Americans have pulled out. So I think that part of this moment is picking up because it gets to some of the awkwardness that Trump sort of expresses when he's on these world stages. You know, we're talking about a guy who just didn't have foreign policy experience before he took on this role. And you see some of almost his nervousness when he's up there trying to state a script. When he goes off script is sometimes when he gets in trouble. And you can see that he's just not in his sort of comfortable skin like we see him in other formats.
It's still on that learning curve, we see. But things are picking up there. Rick Klein, I know you may have to leave us at some point. So I thank you for being with us. It's always good to talk to you.
Thanks, Amna.
And Mary Alice, I'm not letting you go just yet because we have a lot to talk about. Meanwhile, down in Washington, D.C., yeah, listen, this is sort of the Hail Mary from the Republicans, right, when it comes to health care reform. Graham Cassidy, we've been hearing a lot about. The Kimmel test, we've been hearing a lot about. Where does this latest effort stand right now for Republicans who are trying to repeal and replace Obamacare?
You're right, it's a last-ditch effort, but it's looking good for them. Right now, a number of Republican senators saying that they are on board. There's only a few who say they're leaning no or are definitely not voting for it. They obviously have a slim margin. We talked about this a lot last spring and last summer. Senate Republicans can only afford to lose 2 votes. And if they lose 2 votes, they have to use Vice President Pence as a tiebreaker. But right now, it's looking like it could come down to the wire. A lot of folks pushing for a vote next week. And there's a lot of folks that are saying this really could pass.
So we don't have specific timing yet. We're looking maybe towards next week, Mary Alice. I mean, when do you think we'll know about any kind of timeline?
Right. Probably soon. If they want to do a vote in the Senate, they need to announce it soon. There's a lot of Senate procedure where they have to give certain notice. They have to vote for it to move forward to the floor for a vote. And it's interesting because there's only a few legislative days left before the end of the month. That's this very interesting deadline. The Senate only has until the end of the month to pass a big sweeping repeal bill with a simple majority. It has to do with a lot of Senate rules where they can pass certain bills under a budget framework. But they only have until the end of the month, and we're talking about only a few more legislative days. That's part of the reason there was this pressure and this last-minute push to actually finally repeal the current Affordable Care Act.
And Mary Alice, I want to get your take on this too, because earlier today, former President Obama was speaking at a Gates Foundation event. It had to do with global development, but he found a way to work in some comments about this Republican effort on health care reform. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
And so when I see people trying to undo that hard-won progress for the 50th or 60th time, with bills that would raise costs or reduce coverage, or roll back protections for older Americans or people with pre-existing conditions, the cancer survivor, the expecting mom, or the child with autism or asthma, for whom coverage once again would be almost unattainable, it is aggravating. And all of this being done without any demonstrable economic or actuarial or plain common sense rationale, it frustrates. And it's certainly frustrating to have to mobilize every couple of months to keep our leaders from inflicting real human suffering on our constituents.
Mary Alice, you know, for a man who is usually so stoic, who is so hesitant to weigh in on the national stage these days, those kinds of words, that language, that's pretty strong.
Absolutely. It's a huge deal. This president has been really restrained over the last few months. There have been plenty of Democrats that have been begging for him to come off the sidelines, and he hasn't. He has been unwilling in a lot of ways to criticize this president. Only on a few occasions, with the Affordable Care Act and with DACA, sort of the legislation about Dreamers, has President Obama wanted to speak out. And this was one of the very first times we've seen him do so on camera. He knew what he was doing. And you're right, really, really strong words, accusing Republicans of inflicting human suffering. And what got at there when he was sort of listing through some of those points were some of the really controversial parts of the repeal bill. You know, there was big parts of the Affordable Care Act that were widely unpopular, but there were other parts that when you break it apart were very popular, making sure that people with pre-existing conditions couldn't be charged more, making sure that older Americans couldn't be charged much more. And so he was really going line by line and saying these things have real consequences, and it's going to be a big deal if you repeal my signature health care bill.
You know, I want to bring you back to the United Nations General Assembly for just a second, because President Trump wasn't the only one, the only Trump to be speaking there. First Lady Melania Trump also delivered some remarks at a luncheon during the week's events. And I want to get your take on what she had to say. Take a listen to her remarks at a luncheon earlier today. Oh, I apologize. We don't actually have the sound. That is my fault. But basically, the gist of her comments were catching on and getting a lot of attention because of the tone. In them, she was talking about stressing the fact that our children are listening to what we are saying, that we should lead by example, that you should do unto others as you would have done to you. And Mary Alice, you and I have talked about this before. There is always this sort of inherent disconnect between the president, who will go out fire and fury and America is strong and stands alone and don't come after us or we'll come after you, and the First Lady, who is asking us to be kind and respectful to others.
Right. You remember back with the Charlottesville protest, it was the First Lady and Ivanka Trump that were some of the first to tweet, really calling out some of those hate groups. And a lot of people noticed that they were willing to speak out where President Trump was not. That was a big part of that conversation that week. And it was really interesting. You know, her remarks were centered around this idea of cyberbullying. And people were very quick to point out that her husband is one who's very quick with Twitter, often using that as a bully pulpit. Just this last weekend, retweeting a tweet that showed him hitting a golf ball into Hillary Clinton's back, and people talking about just how inappropriate that can be, what the consequences are of continuing that kind of behavior, that kind of tone against a former political opponent, what it says to people that voted for her and what that means. And so I think you're right, there's just a huge disconnect in tone between the president and his wife, and people online, like you said, are noticing.
Hey, Mary Alice, I know folks in Washington have their hands full right now trying to get things done, but are they watching? Is that sort of resonating, what's happening up at the UNGA and how the president has been there?
Absolutely. But, you know, I think that right now in the last few days, there's been this real scramble around healthcare. It was really surprising to people that bill and the possibility of repealing the law was sort of back from the dead. Folks have been calling it the zombie bill. So we have felt like a lot of the oxygen was sucked out of the room here in D.C. as people were scrambling to understand that piece of legislation. So I think that has deflected in some ways from what's going on in New York. But absolutely, people are worried about what's going to happen with North Korea. People are paying attention to every single one of the president's words. As you would. That makes sense. And so, of course, this is a huge forum for him, and people are paying attention to everything he says, trying to get any information about what he is saying behind closed doors, and especially because there are fewer American diplomats there than in years past. So people are going through all channels to try to get any information out of what exactly is being discussed and how this president and his team are relaying American interests to these other world leaders.
Mary Alice Parks, live in our D.C. bureau. Thanks, Mary Alice. Always good to talk to you.
Thanks, Amna.
And thanks to all of you for watching as well. Hey, if you want to stay on top of the latest headlines, download the ABC News app today. Get all your latest news and breaking news alerts right to your phone with the ABC News app. Thanks for watching. For now, I'm Amna Nawaz, and I'll see you back.